Greetings and good day. So, as many of you guys know, I do not set, let's call them New Year's resolutions. I don't like them. Why? Because at this point, no one's talking about them anymore, which means that that resolution wasn't that important to that person or whatever. Or that's one way to put it. Or they've quit by now, whatever. I don't like them. Actually, I think if you're going to do a New Year's resolution, you probably should start in February. Why? Because the comedian in Zack Miller says if you do it in February, that month long to start is only 28 days instead of 31. So if you're ever, note to self, if you're ever going to do a month-long challenge, definitely do it in February. Why? Because it's 28 days. And on the worst years, once every 4 years, it's 29. It just makes more sense, people. Anyways, so I get a text message from my buddy Eric Olson. I'm going to guess sometime around Christmas break. Let's just call it the 20th. It's sometime between the 20th and the 27th of December. And he texts me, he's like, he works out every day or almost every day, kind of like me, and was like, I think I'm going to run 1,000 miles in 2019. And I was like, oh, that's crazy. And he goes, do you want to do it too? And I was like, well, I mean, I'm training to do this Ironman race. I think that 1,000 run probably isn't enough, but I also need to incorporate all three disciplines: swim, bike, run. Let me see how many I did last year. And I quickly looked up that I did, like, through all of the disciplines, something like 2,000, maybe a little more than 2,000 miles last year. I was like, okay, like, I feel like I worked out a lot, but I could probably do a lot more than that. And I just threw out some arbitrary number, and it was 10,000. And that's a lot. Okay, so I quickly do the math, and 10,000 miles means that I have to work out basically on average the equivalent of 27.4 miles a day. Now that, for me as a cyclist, means that I have to do roughly an hour and a half bike ride every single day. Now, why does that become a problem? Well, because biking isn't the only discipline I'm doing. So remember, if I swim in this whole thing, that means I then have, and like a 2-mile swim day is like the longest I've ever done. So that means I'm 25 miles behind. Think about that. So how unrealistic are unrealistic goals? And it's something that I think I was thinking through, but maybe I didn't think through completely. And so I set out and I told him, I said, Eric, I'll do 10,000 miles in 2019. I'm training to do this Ironman race. It's called the Eagle Man in Cambridge, Maryland in June. I got to get those miles up anyway. Let's do it. So I literally get 3 days in and I'm like, this is going to be a lot more difficult. And so I have this spreadsheet that I'm looking at, and literally, I believe Eric put it together. So I'm going to do 10,000 miles in 2019. Right? He's a big believer in, like, tell the world that you're doing something. And I'm like, people don't care that I'm running this race. It is whatever. But I like to take it out and figure out it from, like, a career perspective or like a goal setting perspective or habit perspective. And so I got to like about a month in, and I was several hundred miles behind. And I was like, maybe even several weeks behind, or I was a few weeks, and I was like, I can't do this. 10 is too much. Because I think if it was 10 exclusively for bike, that might be doable, right? But the problem is I got to get disciplines in there. I got to build up my running. I have to build in my swimming. And so think about that. If I do a 1-mile swim, I did a 1-mile swim yesterday, I'm actually 26.4 miles behind. And so at the end of the day, I am behind in general, so I've moved this down from 10,000 to 5,000 miles, right? And so 5,000 is still a lot, which is basically 13.7 a day. It's basically running a half a marathon every single day. Let me add a side note that, number one, 2.5 mile swim will probably be the longest that I'll swim. So even any day that I do that, I'm going to be 11 plus miles behind. The longest I've ever run in my life is 13.1 miles. That was 4 or 5 years ago. And the most I've run since then is 6 miles. And bike rides until this year, the longest I'd done was 20-ish miles. I've now done 30 plus 3 times. at a 33.7 and a 31 and a 40-mile bike ride. Just notes, right? So Eric thought it would be smart for me to tell the world how behind I am. Not to like be all negative or anything, but basically like I had to get back on track. And what's interesting is that even though I'm improving on so many other stats, that goal number is actually going the wrong way. So like I'm tracking, the thing that I'm really tracking is how fast I am. And so that speed has improved. However, the goal, I'm 339 miles behind where I need to be on pace at 13.7. Will I get that ahead? Of course. But it's just interesting how I had to adjust, and I'm still behind. And basically, I don't know, whatever 339 divided by 13.7 is. Days behind. I'm many days behind, and it's terrible. But at the end of the day, I will get there. But how realistic do you need to be with unrealistic goals is the point of this show today. And I think it's this, is you need to do things that are unrealistic. Absolutely. Do things that challenge you. Do things that are hard. Do things that you can quantify. But at the end of the day, make sure that it's something that's actually possible. Now, yes, 10,000 miles in a year is possible, and I could have done it. But I also have to be realistic and say, can I train for 3+ hours a day? That is something that professional athletes do and more, right? I'm not a professional athlete. So I had to be realistic with my unrealistic goals, right? So still basically training 14 miles a day is a lot a day, but doubling that was too much with the multiple disciplines. And so when you're thinking of goals, physical or not, I think you have to think about, okay, I want to be unrealistic. I want to challenge myself. I want to make this very difficult. However, I have to be somewhat realistic with myself to make sure that that number isn't so far that I get so far behind that I end up never achieving it, even though I'm achieving crazy numbers in the meantime. And so 5,000 in a year, I think, is absolutely obtainable, but still a crazy number. It's 2.5 times what I did this past year. Remember, where I worked out every single day except for the first year, or the first day of the year. And so thinking about that from a numbers perspective, and I just realized how much I'm like yelling at the screen. Sorry, yelling in the microphone. But what I want you to take away from this is absolutely do unrealistic things. Absolutely have unrealistic goals. But make sure somewhere in there you do some sort of like metric tracking and say, okay, can I actually do, in my case, 30 miles a day? Do I have 2-ish plus hours a day to work out? If in the past the answer was you have 30 minutes, do you think you can have 4 more times that now? Now, what I will tell you is, even in a part of my book, I say this, where what I don't want you to do is say, hey, I'm writing 1 blog post a week right now, and it's really challenging for me to get that. I think I can start to do 5. Which is basically what I just said, right? I went from 2,000 to 10,000 miles. That's unrealistic, okay? But could you double that is basically what I'm trying to do now, right? And so maybe take that 2 or 2.5 times, right, which is what I've done. That might be more realistic, because what I don't want is for you to get to month 2, month 3, and be so far behind that it ends up becoming something that you quit, even though had you done a number that was more realistic, even though it's unrealistic, which I know is weird to say in the same sentence, how that could be for you. I want you to do things that are challenging, that are difficult, but I want you to have some sort of quantifiable number in there that makes sure that you know that you can get to, and that you have the ability to do it. If you have a goal in mind and you want to run that through me, let me know. Hit me up. Would love to talk to you about it. Physical, business, career, whatever it is. But I want you to understand that sometimes some of these goals are a little bit unobtainable, even though you can do something in the middle to be super obtainable. Absolutely do things that are unrealistic, but make sure that they're doable in some capacity before you do them. At least in the 365 day span that I said. That's all I got. Deuces. If you haven't seen my book trailer yet, make sure to check that video out. It's awesome. Zack Miller Says.com.